Hello, I'm Nigel Ayres, and I run Expat Network, your host for today's webinar. We hope you'll find it useful. We live in interesting times, as they say, with the UK government reimposing quarantine on people to the UK. It adds to the complexities of trying to establish residence in Spain if you still have commitments and obligations back in the UK. We'll cover this in the first session. We have a number of very experienced and knowledgeable panelists today who will help to guide you through the requirements to become resident in Spain and help you to find your new home and deal with the practicalities of the move. You can at any time send a question, and we'll try to put as many as we can at the end of each session. And there'll also be a Q&A at the end where we can cover some that have been missed. We will also hold on to any questions that are not covered. We'll try to get an answer to you after the event, or put you in touch with someone who can answer the question. If you're listening to the recording, please also send any questions in to us and we'll be happy to pass them on to our speakers. As well as this online event, we're planning to hold events in Marbella and Alicante in Spain and in Vilamora in the Algarve in Portugal in September. However, with the continuing uncertainty over the air bridge for Portugal and the quarantine for people returning to UK from Spain, we're needing to review the arrangements for this, and we will be in touch. If anybody is interested in taking part in those, please register your interest and we'll keep you updated on our plans for the events. So, as well as running to the webinars, we also have a portal, expatnetwork.com, with a range of information to help you plan your move. And these guides, which you can download, which we hope will help you to plan your move to Spain, and a moving abroad checklist that will go through the points that you should consider at each stage as you plan your move, and then also for British expatriates moving abroad, some of the financial considerations you need to think about as you make the move. So the program for today, we have starting off with Alex Radford of My Law in Spain. He'll take you through the requirements to gain residence in Spain. We then have three Spanish property specialists who help people to find their home in Spain. Joanne Alderton of Aldertons deals with the northern Costa Blanca and the Costa de Valencia. Nigel Salmon of Girasol Homes covers the southern Costa Blanca, the Murcia region and the southeast of Spain. Finding Jason Wild of Marbella Connection covers the Costa del Sol. We will look at how to go about finding a property, the popular areas in each region, and current market in Spain, as well as the prospects for it. We will then return to Alex Radford, who will take you through the buying process and conveyancing process in Spain and how it differs from the UK. Buying in foreign currency creates exchange risks, and Tom Arnold will explain options to manage those risks and what the prospects are for exchange rates. We'll then move to Brad Hanson of Blevins Franks, who will give you an overview of the Spanish tax system and help with advice about tax planning that should be considered before you move to Spain, as well as the issues once you are in Spain. And then finally, Carrie Ann Harrison of Ibex Insurance will take you through the options for healthcare and private insurance in Spain. At the end, we will conclude with a Q&A where you can put your questions to the panel. We asked you to let us know about your plans when you registered for the event so that we could ensure the webinar was directed at your needs. With the Brexit Transition Period ending on 31st December this year, we had assumed most of you wanted to beat that deadline. In fact, only 47% of you plan to move this year, and around a third are planning to move in 2021, with a quarter after that. So obviously there's a mixed audience from that perspective. And when it comes to the reasons you move, as is true of the majority of people coming to Spain, the majority here are interested in retiring. There's then also 12% of people looking to buy a holiday home, and I'm sure some of those are doing so as part of their retirement planning. We also then have people working, though, the younger people still work and still come to Spain to enjoy the lifestyle, and that is another element of our audience today. So then it's a question of who will you be moving with, and clearly with partner is the majority there, but with nearly 2/3, 1 in 5 of you traveling alone, and then a proportion traveling with family, either adult or children. When it comes to where people are planning to live, the most popular area is the Costa del Sol, but we also have, I guess, overall the combination of Costa Blanca South and Costa Blanca North, slightly ahead of that. The other areas, we then see a reasonable spread of the areas that are probably less favoured by British expats, but have their own attractions, as the property people will explain later. What is clear, however, is that the majority of you are fairly clear about where you want to go, with only 16% undecided. Rent or buy. One of the issues we come across all the time is whether you should rent or buy. We can see here that 71% are planning to buy, but unusually there's a 33% of you planning to rent first. And although that's an option that we often recommend because it gives you the opportunity to know a little bit more about the area you want to live in and decide whether it's right for you, as well as get to know the market. This is higher than we normally would expect to see, and I think that is connected to the time constraints with COVID-19 and the end of the the transition period. So let's start with Alex Radford, who will explain the requirements and benefits of gaining residence before the end of the Brexit transition period. He will also explain what we know about the rules for Britain's plan to move from 2021 onwards. Alex.
Thank you, Nigel, for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today, and thank you for Nigel and Susie for organising it from Expat Network. It's a pleasure to be here, and just to let you know, who am I? So my name is Alex Radford. I'm an English solicitor and a Spanish lawyer. My parents moved to Spain in 1981 when Spain wasn't a member of the EU. I grew up in Spain, went to an English school to start off with, then a Spanish school, and I returned to the UK in '92 to start studying law. Qualified as a lawyer started practicing as a lawyer in '99, and then I returned to Spain in 2003, and now I'm a partner with my law in Spain. We have offices across Spain, in Mallorca, Tenerife, Costa Blanca, Residencia, Valencia, Madrid, Bilbao, and Almeria and Marbella. And we act for clients buying, selling, inheriting property all over Spain, and more recently applying for residency. So there's a lot of British people at the moment who have been their holiday plans and their buying plans have been put on hold because of COVID, and there's a lot of pent-up interest and demand at the moment for British people to come out to Spain and to buy a property or sign a rental contract and then apply for residency. And really, the pent-up interest and demand is mainly because at the end of this year, we come to the end of the transition period, and the rules and regulations that are in place now to apply for and obtain Spanish residency are less rigorous than the ones that we expect next year. So first of all, why do you need Spanish residency? Well, basically, anybody, any European citizen or a citizen of another country intending to move to Spain to spend more than 3 months in Spain has an obligation to apply for residency, and they don't have to apply for it. They don't have to apply for it after the 3 months, but they have to apply for it within the first 3 months. So if you intend to spend more than 3 months in Spain, you have an obligation to register as a resident. Now, it's very important to bear in mind that the calendar year in Spain runs from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. So if you spend more than 6 months in Spain, then you are in a calendar year, then you are considered a Spanish tax resident. And if you spend between 3 and 6 months in Spain, you are not considered a tax resident. What does that mean? Tax resident means you will pay tax in Spain on worldwide assets and income. And if you move into Spain lock, stock and barrel, then that's normally the case, what people want to do. If you're not intending to become a tax resident in Spain, then it's important to stay under the 6 months, 183 days threshold. Okay, So how long does the residency last? Well, basically, once you apply for and obtain the residency, it lasts for 5 years, okay? And after 5 years, you can renew it. That will be then renewed. And after 10 years, you can actually apply for Spanish nationality. So you can change your nationality over from British nationality or any other nationality to a Spanish nationality once you've been here for 10 years. As far as the residency is concerned, if you are out of the country consecutively for 6 months, then you will actually lose that residency. So in effect, what I'd recommend that you do there is that you break that 6 months up, so you're not out of the country for a full 6 months. A lot of people are asking us at the moment whether or not they can still, there's enough time to come to Spain and buy a property or rent a property and obtain their residency. And the good news is that yes, there is, okay? So you can still come to Spain as and when flights allow and return flights, etc., because of the quarantine issues. But you can come to Spain, you can enter into a rental contract, buy a property, and then apply for residency. But the clock is ticking, and you've got until the 31st of December to apply. I would recommend that you start that process as quickly as possible. We've put in place a Spanish website called www.getspanishResidency.com. There's a lot of frequently answered questions on there, and the procedure for applying is set out online there. So I urge you to have a look at that. www.getspanishResidency.com. A lot of people ask us, what documentation will I need to apply? And basically, this kind of differs depending on the age of the applicant. If you're under the age of 65, then you will need to have private medical cover in place, or you can register as a self-employed person, or you can, if you're employed, then you'll receive a contract of employment and you've got money coming in. So in effect, the Spanish authorities want to see that you've got sufficient monies coming in to live on, and also that you'll have healthcare, private healthcare or state healthcare in place. So under the age of 65, you can obtain that healthcare by way of a private medical cover. Lots of people will be surprised. Lots of people we're talking to obtaining quotes from UK companies about health cover, when in effect they should actually apply for quotes from Spanish-based companies because they tend to be much cheaper. So I'd recommend, if you are thinking about residency, again, have a look on our website. We've got some examples there of how much you'll pay for medical cover, and then there's insurance providers will be on this webinar later on today, and you can contact them and apply for a quote. And I'd suggest, as I said, you apply for a quote from a Spanish-based agent so they can talk to various brokers. So basically, that's the under 65s. Over 65, you can apply for Form S1 in the UK, and that will entitle you to health cover in Spain. So if you come to Spain this year and you've got Form S1, or you basically have private medical cover, you can apply for and obtain residency, and you'll have residency for the next 5 years until you renew it. Okay, that's not going to go away after the UK leaves the EU permanently at the end of this year. Okay, so that's very important to bear in mind. The other documentation that you'll need a rental contract with at least 12 months in there, or a proof of ownership of a property, so that if you bought a property, typically the Spanish authorities want to see a land search confirming that you own that property. So in effect, private medical care or Form S1 for the over 65s, rental contract, or a deed. If you're going to rent and you're intending to buy then a property, then I would suggest you put in place a rental contract with a six months review clause. So typically the authorities will want to see a 12-month contract, but if you are intending to buy, I have a clause in there that means that allows you to leave or end the rental contract after 6 months. So you've got those documents, and then you need proof of income. And proof of income varies on the region that you apply for, but typically what the Spanish authorities are wanting to see is monies coming in of about 850 euros per person, as well as up to €9,000 in a bank account. And again, regions to regions vary. So contact us if you're applying for residency. Depending where, those amounts may vary. But in effect, you've got to prove that you've got medical cover in place, either private or health cover provided by the state, Spanish state, property to live in, and then income. And basically then the process is we submit the application for you. We can submit that online so long as you're in Spain. And then when the authorities have approved your application, they will ask you to come along to the Foreigners Department, and you'll be granted with a new TIE card, which is basically a photographic card with your thumbprint on there, and that will basically provide you with residency for the next 5 years. So at some stage, we will need you to come out to Spain. And also, as a result of new changes to the residency process from the 6th of July, all applicants also have to register on the Padron, which is the census. So in effect, you would go along to your town hall with a copy of your deed to the property or a copy of the rental contract, and you would register on the census. And at the same time, you can sign up to vote in local or European elections. So a lot of people say to us, "Oh, I'm a resident already, but not a pensioner, but I'm going to retire soon." And they ask whether or not they have to let the authorities know. And in effect, yes, you do. So we are acting for clients who are moving out to Spain. One of the partners or spouses may be over the age of 65, and the other one is younger. You can apply for Form S1, and the younger spouse who may not have retired can be a beneficiary of Form S1. And when they reach that golden age of retirement, then they can obviously let the Spanish authorities know that they've retired as well, and they could apply for Form S1 in their own name. Form S1 can be applied for from a Social Security office in Newcastle, so you'd have to make a call to them and ask them to provide that to you. So a lot of people also talk to us. They don't quite understand the difference between residency, citizenship, and nationality. And basically, just to clarify, nationality is you're a British passport holder or whatever nationality of passport you hold. But residency and citizenship are different. Residency is in fact where you live, and you're not going to become a citizen of Spain. You will become a resident of Spain. So that's the main difference here. A resident, you're living in Spain, either for up to 6 months as a non-tax resident or more than 6 months for a tax resident, and you've become a resident in Spain. But basically, you don't change your nationality by applying for and obtaining residency. You would only change your nationality if you then chose to take Spanish a passport out. As you're aware, and I mentioned, the UK leaves the EU at the end of the year. The transition period comes to an end, and people are concerned about what will happen to the residency. Well, in effect, if you apply for it and obtain it this year, then nothing will happen. You will continue to have residency for the next 5 years when you reapply. And it's important that once you've got the residency, that, for example, if you are under the age of 65, that you keep your medical insurance in place, and obviously you keep your address in place, because the Spanish authorities, when you come to renew it, will want to see the documentation proving that you've lived in Spain for the last 5 years. Excuse me. What happens if there isn't an agreement between the UK and the EU at the end of this year? Well, in effect, if you've applied for and obtained residency, then it doesn't make a difference, because the withdrawal agreement covered residency rights. So if you've applied for and obtained residency this year, those rights will continue. If you are moving to Spain and selling your main residence in the UK, then I would recommend that you sell your UK residence first and then buy a property here and apply for residency. Because once you become a Spanish tax resident, then you become a Spanish tax resident, you pay tax in Spain on worldwide assets and income. So let's just say you moved to Spain in 2021, and in that year, say in February, you sold your UK property, moved to Spain, registered, bought a property, or you'd already purchased a property and used that new property as to apply for your residency, then the Spanish tax authorities could consider that you became a resident in 2021, you'd sold a property in that year, and they could tax you on that. So when you arrive in Spain, and the timing of when you come to Spain is quite important, because if you spend more than 6 months in Spain, you're a Spanish tax resident. So I would recommend that if you're selling a property this year, then you only apply for residency from now onwards, which means you've spent less than 6 months in Spain, so you won't be considered a Spanish tax resident. But it just playing, it's very important to be careful of those timescales. So to avoid, if possible, you becoming a tax resident in Spain, selling your UK property, and being subject to capital gains tax in Spain on the sale of that property, which could be your main residence. Okay, so just bear that in mind. And also, if you've got other properties that you move to Spain, you buy a property in Spain, you sell your main house in the UK, but you've got other properties and you sell those, then the Spanish authorities will want you to submit a tax return on the sale of those and pay tax in Spain on that as well. If you spend less than 6 months in Spain in a year, then you do not have to worry about becoming a Spanish tax resident. Okay, so in effect, if you buy a property, the year after you've purchased the property, you would pay what's known as the non-resident income tax. And that is a percentage of the catastral value, which is a value the Spanish authorities use to calculate the value of the property. You'd pay that tax the year after the purchase of your property. But that is the only tax that you pay to the Spanish estate, because you spend less than 6 months here, but you own a Spanish property. So we've got a resident, tax resident for more than 6 months, full tax resident paying tax in Spain on worldwide assets income, and then we've got someone who's here for less than 6 months. They are a non-Spanish tax resident, but both of those applicants or people moving to Spain or owning a property in Spain but not living here for more than 6 months are considered residents. Okay, so anyone living in Spain for more than 3 months is considered a resident. So the year after you've purchased a property and you've become a tax resident, so you're spending more than 6 months in Spain, if you've got assets of the value of over the value of 50,000 euros, then you have to declare those in March, and that's known as Modelo 720. So in effect, if one person keeps assets in their home country of more than 50,000 euros, they have to register with the Spanish authorities. As I mentioned earlier, the Spanish tax year runs from January to December. The UK tax year, as you're aware, goes from the 6th of April to the 5th of April. So if you move to Spain next year, let's just say you move to Spain in March, in effect, what you'd be able to do is apply for a tax rebate for any tax you paid in the UK from January to April, and then you'd pay, if you became a Spanish tax resident because you spent more than 6 months in Spain, then the year after next year, so 2022, you'd put in a tax return for 2021 in Spain, and you pay tax in Spain on the whole year. But in the meantime, you could have applied for a tax rebate from the UK authorities. Some of our clients are under the age of 65. They're retiring to Spain. However, they might have an ongoing medical condition, and they can't obtain private medical cover. So what can they do there? In effect, they could register if they could work. They could register to be self-employed, and that would provide them with health cover and protection. Or if they've got a spouse, they could become a beneficiary of their policy. And after 12 months of being registered on the census, then people can actually apply to what's known as the Convenio Especial, and that would provide you with health cover. And typically, a monthly payment for people under the age of 65 to the Convenio Especial is €60 and 157 for those over that age, and that's per month. Okay. So I think that's basically the residency process is quite straightforward. You've got to get the documentation together. You've got to have bank statements proving you've got means to live in Spain. You've got healthcare in place, whether it's private or the Form S1, and you've got to have an address via a 12-month rental contract or a property deed. Once those documents are collated, we then submit those to the authorities. They will approve those, and then we'll be asking you to come out to Spain for a meeting at the Foreigners Office to collect your card. That is the process. If you've got any other questions, I'm happy to answer them now along with Nigel, or feel free to kind of go on our website, www.getspanishresidency.com, and book an appointment to speak to us, or send us an email. We'll be happy to answer any inquiries you've got. Nigel, okay. Over to you.
Many thanks, Alex. One question we've had from other people is about what happens in 2021. Just to clarify, people will, there's the Schengen rules, but presumably there is also a number of visa options that people will be able to follow. So could you just very briefly outline that as we're sort of running out of time?
Certainly. So basically, 2021. If you don't manage to get residency this year, but you come next year, then we expect at the moment, if you haven't got residency, you'll be able to spend 90 days in a 180-day period in Spain, and you'll have to apply for some form of visa to come into Spain. Obviously, if you've got a residency from this year, you won't have to do that. And the financial requirements, Nigel, haven't been set yet, but basically governments work on the basis. On a reciprocal basis. So if the UK says let European nationals in on a contract with about, say, the amount that's being talked about at the moment is around the £25,000 mark. What we could see is that basically a main applicant coming to Spain next year to apply for residency will have to prove that they've got €25,000 in the bank account. And then basically each beneficiary about €6,000. So those are the figures we've got at the moment for non-Europeans. So we're acting for clients from the Middle East and also from America and Australia who are applying for residency here in South Africa, and they basically need €25,000 as the main applicant and €6,000 then per beneficiary. So if there was no agreement between the UK and EU, that's what we would expect, but we've got to wait and see.
Right. So I mean, essentially, there will be things like the non-lucrative visa currently available to non-EU citizens, work permits and the like. So, depending on the reason for people's moving to Spain, one can assume those would apply unless something special is agreed by Boris with the EU or with Spain directly, as you said. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Alex. And I think we'll now sort of move on to property. And so I'd just like to just joined by our property experts, and we'll now deal with the question of how you find the property. Thank you very much, Alex. Cheers. Right. We've got here Jason Wild of Marbella Connections, Nigel Salmon of Durasol Homes, and Joanne Alderton of Alders. Welcome, all of you.
Morning. Thanks for inviting us. Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, good to see you. First of all, I guess the opening question really is, how do people start to go about finding their home in Spain? And Joanne, perhaps you could just sort of give a little overview of how people should approach.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really important is that people realise that looking for property and purchasing property in Spain is a very different process to the UK market, not least because most of the clients and most of the people looking for property are actually looking online from their homes in the UK and are studying areas many times that they've never even visited. So the first most fundamental point that people need to do is invest time in searching for the correct agent to work with, because you want to make that connection, you want to establish that relationship so that you're giving all your information just to one person. They can then feed it out to other people on your behalf, but they can act as your barrier and they can act as your, essentially your concierge service over here to pull in everything that's going to suit you, and you invest in that time in finding out exactly about each other. So it's imperative that you just choose one agent to work with rather than 5, 6, 7 or 100. In my area alone here, there's 1,000 agents in the area that we work with. So it's a minefield out there. So you need someone that's going to work on your behalf.
Nigel, how do you sort of see your role in helping people to?
Similar to Joanne's. I mean, it's we've been around for over 12 years, and effectively experience counts. There's a lot of people who have set up in the last sort of 2 or 3 years as the market's got better, who have sort of come over as a buyer in many cases and sort of set up an operation which is effectively small scale. There's a lot of help we can give to people, and I guess the internet is our friend and our enemy in many cases, because you know, you can spend many years watching A Place in the Sun, which is useful for us. I mean, it puts us on the map, but effectively it might not be the best way, and that's generally not how people buy houses with the television presenter. So generally it comes down to a fairly forensic interview with the client, if we can get there, and effectively to keep them on track. And that's not a control thing, it's basically common sense, because you know, if you've never been to an area, yes, you've got to come out and have a look at it, but the actual research that somebody does on the internet back home versus the amount of time that they actually give us to spend with them before they come out is the wrong equation. It needs to be much more of this sort of conversation, rather than sort of looking at maybe out-of-date websites, stuff that looks too good to be true, and all the things. And I understand it's basically, you've got to work with the right people, and I think, you know, I speak for all the panelists here that we've got a wealth of experience to help people with. So you've got to open up, whether you're looking for a second home, retirement, relocation, weekend getaway, whatever it might be. And it will come down to obviously a set of questions that we will ask you to help you.
So, Jason, I mean, I certainly hear people say that it's good to work with a large number of agents, because that gives you different perspectives and start. Whereas I think the general view here would be that it's best to deal with one agent. That's the sort of approach that you take.
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, our role, as the other two have already said, really, it's about building a rapport and an understanding with a potential buyer. If you can provide, if you can understand what it is they're looking for, then we can advise better. By shopping online, that shopping online mentality doesn't really bear great dividends. It can be often quite frustrating. Property is always selling quite quickly, and they're not always updated. It's not always possible to keep listings as up to date as possible. But you know, especially in today's climate where things are listed, you've got a rapport with the vendor as well. Certain prices might not be advertised as being available at below market value. But if you're dealing with an agent that you've expressed clearly what it is you're looking for, you can then be guided in a way that you know, we can introduce these buyers to the right deals in the right areas and at the right price. That's really it's a marriage in effect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we also saw from the statistics in terms of people here that you know, a reasonable number of people are looking at renting before they're What do you see are the pros and cons of that? Joanne, would you like to?
Was that to me? Sorry, Nigel, I couldn't hear you very well. Yeah, yeah. I mean, renting before you buy, it's a great idea, and on paper, it's an even better idea. But in reality, you have to be realistic about the areas that you're looking in. The majority of people that are looking, as we see on your breakdown, are looking around the costas. Now, the costas are led by tourism, which means that the majority of properties that are for rent are for short-term rentals only, maybe 6 months, etc., in the wintertime. There's not a lot of property available for 12 months, etc. So it's a very finite market. Yes, come over in the wintertime because it's always good to experience the surroundings and what the lifestyle is like outside of the summer season. But be prepared to use that time wisely whilst you're renting to actually actively look for the property that you want to buy. It's just renting to buy is great, but it's not, don't put all your eggs in that one basket. Be realistic about what's out there.
Nigel or Jason, did you have anything to add to that?
It doesn't. It's not so common here. People will probably come out on multiple trips, let's say 2 or 3 trips for maybe a week at a time or something. So I think that's experience what people do. So it's as Joanne says, you've got to find the right rental. And the thing is, what people tend to do is they normally come out and basically find something a bit quicker than they think they're going to find something, you know. And again, that's how we do, as well as obviously testament to their own personal opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So perhaps we could move on to the sort of market. What impact has COVID-19 had, and where do we see the market going over the next few months? Perhaps Jason, if you could give us your view, then we'll ask the others to follow on.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's had a direct impact in the fact that the freedom of movement has been impacted. The number of viewings and therefore sales without seeing the property is always unlikely to get sold. So agents have been running around videoing everything they have on their books, but it's very rare for a buyer to commit on that basis. So, you know, it's impacted sales, but on the flip side, there's been no sort of decrease in interest. People have more time on their hands at home. So, you know, maybe a lot of it is curiosity, but the clients I've spoken to via Zoom or audio calls are adamant that once things lift, they will be looking to travel to Spain and commit to buying. So, you know, the signs are still good. You know, they simply had enough of life in the UK, and with Brexit now obviously official, they want a fresh start, and we're better than Spain.
And so, in terms of the prices, is that sort of reflected in prices?
Well, I mean, can't speak for Spain as a whole, but I know in previous times of crises, prices have fallen as much as sort of 30% in some parts of the country. But demand for the Costa del Sol, which is obviously where I'm based, as a tourist destination, is strong, even in the current climate. So, you know, it's a place that people have been flocking to since the 60s, and it won't change anytime soon, I don't think. You know, demand is still outweighing supply, which means, you know, prices hold strong for longer.
So, Nigel, what's your view on prices and how they're likely to change?
It's probably a little bit early to say. I haven't seen it being impacted yet. Back to the COVID question, effectively, our sort of spring has now become our summer. Now, obviously, it's been slightly delayed again because obviously some quarantine restrictions which came in over the weekend. We've still got people coming out, and I think the people who haven't got jobs, who are maybe retired or basically looking at you know, the bigger picture, they're still coming. But obviously we've lost some along the way who are employed, and obviously that would probably break the back of their employer. But it's too early to say. And I think the thing is, if you're in popular locations, in good locations, you're going to be less impacted by price reductions But if you're buying something in the middle of nowhere, which is still in the middle of nowhere, and there's no shops, restaurants, anything, then basically you're going to have an issue. We wouldn't recommend you buy something like that unless that's where you wanted to be, and you had to buy it because you've only got a small budget or whatever it might be. But we would point out the pitfalls of that as well. So I don't, you know, if this continues for another 6 months as it is, you know, with travel restrictions, well, then it might be a factor. But at the moment, I don't think that's the case.
Jason, we'll start at the other end of the country. Start at the Costa del Sol. Could you talk us through the sort of popular areas in the Costa del Sol and the problems? Okay.
Well, the Costa del Sol is a stretch of 165 kilometres on the south coast of Spain. The main municipalities consist of Malaga, the capital, the city centre, into Torremolinos, Benalmádena, then Fuengirola, Mijas, Marbella, Benavís, Estepona, Casares, which includes Duquesa, Manilva through to San Roque and Sotogrande, which is up near Gibraltar. So that's kind of the width of coastline. The most popular areas, I guess, within those, and this is probably going to come up in conversation, but you know, Malaga Centre, it's a relatively unknown city, but I mean, it's steeped in history. It's going back into the 18th century when the Phoenicians and Romans were first settled there. It's got a historic old town. There's castles, there's Roman ruins, there's a cathedral, there's the Picasso Museum. There's a port that's just been revamped. There's the beaches, of course. There's good shopping areas, and the food and drink. You know, it's typical of the area. Coming then sort of east away from the airport, you've got the costas, local costas, which is Benalmádena and Mijas. Benalmádena is popular because of its long promenades. It's got the boating marina, so it attracts visitors that way. Mijas is known for its white wall village and golf courses, and also you've got the popular fishing village of La Cala de Mijas, which draws a lot of interest in itself. Marbella, then, you know, that's a brand. People say they've got a place in Marbella, but I'm afraid it doesn't hold the postcode. And many will not go anywhere else. You know, if money's no object, you know, it does come at a premium. It does have it's known for its high-end luxury side of things with Nueva Andalucía, Puerto Banús. But Marbella, the town, is actually quite understated. It's a low-key. It's still full of local residents. I lived in the old town for 9 odd years. It's very, very charming. It still maintains its Spanish heritage, if you like. But this is the postcode many aspire to, but often they end up elsewhere. One such area for that would be Benavís. It's got a great village. It's a very well-run municipality. It boasts many fantastic golf courses, and it's been the go-to destination for a lot of new arrivals in the last 10 years, I'd say, where Marbella was considered unsuitable. And then developing on from there, another area that's seen a spike in interest is Estepona. In recent years, this is partly really down to the bus route, which has been expanded from Malaga Airport, and the area has vast amounts of money that's been invested in there. So you've got they've really tried to kind of attract the tourist and make the destination more appealing to the foreign investor. They've got new sports facilities in town. They've completely redone relaying the beach promenade, pedestrianised the old town. They've revamped the boating marina. You know, there's been a lot of changes across the whole area. And then the areas of Casares, Manilva, heading down towards Sotogrande are areas of real boom. There's a lot of investment heading out that way now. So there's a fair stretch of coast there, but you know, with the way that we operate with, you know, not all of the listings we deal with are our own. We have access to 8,000 resales. We've got over 250 to 300 new build developments. So, you know, we've got a good collaboration covering all that area with what people need.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And perhaps now if we could move on to Nigel and the area that you cover, which is the...
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Nigel. And thanks, Jason. That's a really good synopsis of your area. Excellent. Yeah, really good. We cover generally south of Alicante Airport, right down to past La Manga Club and La Manga Strip, probably down to the Almeria border, so places like Ayres as well. Areas that people might have heard of are places like Torrevieja, Cabaroi, Calazenia, and basically there's more into the Murcia region. You've got San Pedro del Pinatar, Lopagan, San Javier. This area here is the sort of southeast corner of Spain. So it's really known for its excellent weather, and winter is very, very good here. Generally, if I go out in December, it's probably about 18 to 20 degrees during the day, and I'll probably need a jumper at night. But it's pretty good. Doesn't rain a huge amount here. When it does, it's pretty dramatic, but generally the stats are about 320 days of sunshine a year, which is what all the tourism boards promote here. And generally you've got sort of a mix between typical Spanish and also obviously you've got sort of more built up expat areas here. So you sort of pays your money as you take your choice. We can show you any of that if that's what you want. So quite varied. I mean, we've still got properties here, sort of 50, 60,000 euros, right up to the sort of, you know, early millions. There's some really nice resorts. There's La Manga Club. There's Las Colinas Golf and Country Club Resort here. There's La Finca Golf and Country Club Resort, which is a little bit further north of us here. You can go inland if you want. Again, it depends on the type of purchaser you are. You know, there's fincas and farms, the bits and pieces like that. It can get very, very hot in the summer. And obviously, the sort of further northwest as we go here, we've got the Alto Plano where they grow the wine in Umilla, that sort of area as well. And there's sort of, you've got places like Caravaca de la Cruz, where effectively it's a very holy place. They do this sort of famous pudding rice there as well. So I guess there's something for everybody. You know, but generally a lot of people come here because it's generally pretty affordable compared to some other places in Spain. It's very easily communicated. You've got Alicante Airport, you've got the new airport at Corbera in Murcia, and generally a lot of people drive now as well. If they've got pets, they bring the dog down, and, you know, so it takes probably a couple of days to get down from the UK. So something for everybody. It's very well communicated. It's very established as well. And generally, a lot of people who buy here have maybe their mum and dad have had a house, they've come on holiday here, whatever it might be. So again, something for everybody, I guess.
Well, thanks very much, Nigel. And Joanne, you'll cover the northern Costa Blanca, so perhaps you could explain a bit about that.
Yeah. Again, I'm worried about the background noise, apologise. Yeah, so whereas Nigel flies into Alicante and turns left, if you come in to see me, you'll fly into Alicante and turn right. And I cover the whole of the northern Costa Blanca. So a lot of people think that the Costa Blanca North is Benidorm, and that's so far removed from the truth, it's unreal. We cover some spectacular areas here. There's mountains, there's coves, there's rocky caves. It's absolutely gorgeous. Some of the areas that people might have heard of, places like Altea, Denia, Moraira, Javier, Gandia, Oliva. So yeah, it's a very green area where we are. We have beautiful white sandy beaches, and we also have rocky coves, so something for everybody. It's particularly huge, our area, with the gastronomy tourism. It's the home of paella. It's also the home, Calpe, for example, has 3 Michelin-starred restaurants just in the town alone. So it actually holds the accolade of having the most Michelin-starred restaurants of anywhere in Europe in one town. So it's becoming a massive tourism business over here. And then we also have the Halon Valley, which is somewhere that I really like to take people and show them because it's magnificently spectacular. It's the home of wine. So we do a little wine tasting when you come out with us as well. Why not? We're here to enjoy ourselves. And it's all about showing you this area. When you come out here, get rid of your preconceived ideas of Benidorm, because it's not Benidorm at all. It's so much more.
Okay, thank you all. So one of the debates that we often hear is about whether to live, by the coast or further inland. What's the advice you give on that, Nigel? Do you want to?
Well, it just depends on. I guess if you're from a small flat in a city, and you see a great big finca with 20,000 square meters of land, you might be a bit hooked on that because it's completely different as well. But again, you've got to do your research. If you're isolated in the middle of nowhere and you like going and seeing people and bars and restaurants and being super convenient, then probably that's not for you. But they will be probably a bit cheaper. I mean, we've got some really good options, and obviously a lot of people are sort of looking at sort of lockdown properties. They want to have their own pool, they want to be private. That's their dream villa. House, pool, big garden. Palm trees, the whole lot. So you can get it. And also said earlier, I mean, if you go quite a lot inland, you're going to have pretty good aircon. And it will be pretty hot inland. There's not going to be much of a breeze. Obviously on the coast, well, obviously we've all got coastal areas that we're talking about here. You'll have a breeze and you'll be well communicated, but the house will be much smaller, or it might be an apartment. So again, there's pros and cons. I guess if you're living out here full time and you've got a finca or a country house and you can see your neighbours dotted around, then that probably could, and you're within reasonable reach of a decent town, then that could be a good move for you. Again, just depends on your circumstances as well. If you're social gregarious, you want to be playing golf all the time and bowls or whatever, or basically cricket maybe, you're going to need to be closer to civilization. So again, it just depends on how far inland you want to be. I mean, we've got, where we are here, we're sort of bordered by mountains, which makes the actual area, a very fertile plain, and effectively there's a lot of properties sort of over the mountains and that sort of area. There's a very, very different area to what we normally deal with. So we can help, but again, just want to ask the client whether they want to be isolated, which they could be.
Okay, so Jason, is the sort of view fairly similar down in the Costa del Sol, or?
Yeah, I mean, it obviously does depend on what people want, but in fairness, we've got urban land up to sort of 10 kilometres inland. I mean, obviously the finca style property, obviously you get more for your money in terms of housing. There's larger outdoor space. Many come with a lot of land, but the downside is typically that you're limited to the type of property. It would be like almost like a farmland dwelling. These are not always the best quality build. Many started out as cattle sheds and they've stuck some windows in and gone, hey, look, a house. So the main consideration on top of that is the infrastructure. It's not being as good. Many don't have mains water. They rely on wells. Sanitation, that needs to be emptied by yourself. Mains electric isn't always as stable. The distance of things, a decent shop or a supermarket, accessibility, generally, it's a far cry from the comforts of home that people are typically used to. And the other consideration is that these properties are often not as they seem. Just because they've got the doors and the windows doesn't mean that they're actually official residences for living in. There's many different types of finca property, and you really need to be talking to someone who knows the difference. You need to be careful before committing to buying, get a lawyer involved. And as Nigel has already said, one important point is, the further inland you go from the coast, the hotter it gets in the summer and the colder it is at night in the winter. So, I mean, I play cricket 40 kilometres inland from the coast, and it can be 34, 35 on the coast, on the beach, and I'll drive up there and it's 45. So in the summer, it's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And in the northern Costa Blanca, Joanne, how many? I mean, there are various places that are, heavily populated, shall we say, by expats and so on, and some areas are rather more sort of Spanish. Do you find people looking for one rather more than the other, or what's the experience?
Yeah, I think initially when we first meet people and we have our initial conversations with people, most people seem to be looking for a villa or an apartment or a townhouse within striking distance of the resort or the coast, within striking distance of bars, restaurants. But this is where it goes back to right at the beginning of our webinar, where we talk about investing in the agent who's going to speak to you and find out about you, and then we'll match a town or an area to your actual requirements rather than just looking at properties online. For example, here, most people come out to me and want to look in Javier or Moreira because they're very, very popular areas around here. And in reality, when we do orientations, I take them to the Halon Valley, which is 20 minutes inland. It's about 30 kilometres inland. It is stunning, and a lot of people, I'd say maybe over 60% of the clients we bring out here will end up purchasing in that area because it's an area they haven't really considered, but once they're there, they love it. So it's about, you have to invest that time to get out with myself, with Jason, with Nigel, and spend the time in these areas, getting to know them, scratch beneath the surface, and let us show you the areas and let us build a relationship with you so that we can basically get to know you and then say, we're like matchmakers. You know, it's a great pairing, you know, and it's like a fine wine.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I think we'll now sort of move on to the practicalities of the buying process. And so, thank you very much. And we'll take us through that. And obviously, people can contact me if they want to get in contact with any of you to find out a little bit more about.
Happy to help.
Thanks for having us. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Speak later on the Q&A.
Right. So, Alex.
Hi, Nigel, I can hear you.
Yep. So, right. So now we'll move on to having sort of found the property. It's then a question of sort of going through the process. And I just wondering if you could talk people through how it varies from what they may be used to in the UK or elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the UK, if you buy a property, you'd instruct your own lawyer. You wouldn't leave it to an estate agent to manage the conveyancing process. Sometimes agents across Spain will try and encourage buyers to maybe use them as a conveyancer because they know the process and familiar with it. But I'd always recommend that you instruct an independent lawyer. That independent lawyer confirms their costs in writing to you, and also the overall cost of the purchase, because depending on where you buy in Spain, Nigel, you've had 3 established estate agents there talk about their different areas. The costs vary, and the costs vary also whether you buy a brand new property or a second-hand property. So, for example, in Spain, when you buy a property, you pay what's known as transfer tax, purchase property tax, and basically in the Valencian region, which includes Alicante, it's 10%. Catalonia, it's 10% as well. You move down the coast to Murcia and Andalusia, and that's 8%. So, as part of finding that perfect property is also important, I think, to bear in mind budget, and that's something that people can do before, something to consider before buying. But I'd allow basically between 12 and 14% on top of the purchase price to purchase a property. And if you're buying a brand new property, you're going to pay 10% VAT, IVA in Spain, and you'll also pay stamp duty at 1.5%. So the cost there then could go up to 15%.
And, in terms of the way that the property purchase process works, is it very similar in terms of offer acceptance and then going through to exchange contracts and completion as you would see in the UK, or is it rather different?
Yeah, but basically, Nigel, so before we even get to that stage, I think it's very important that if people are looking at coming to move out of Spain, either to live or to buy a property, that they consider carefully the regions, the towns, the buying cost. If they're going to apply for a mortgage, I'd say contact an independent mortgage broker, find out from them how much you can borrow, Typically in Spain, banks will lend up to 65 or 70% of the value. And if you're looking at costs of 12, 14% on top, you're going to need a deposit of at least 45%. So I think before you come out to Spain, it's important to kind of look at those figures. And also think about whether or not it's going to be a holiday home or it's going to be a house for you to live in. Because if it's a holiday home, then you probably want less maintenance and you want to be able to arrive at the property fairly quickly. So typically you're looking at a property, I don't know, within an hour of an airport. And bear in mind the main airports, I'm talking Barcelona, Alicante and Malaga would service the holiday areas. And then there are other airports along there as well, but less frequent flights. So I think, you know, to do your homework first, then also think about who's going to own it, who's paying for it. So if it's a married couple, obviously they probably buy in their joint names. But if for example it was an unmarried couple or someone with more liquidity than the other one, then you can actually change the ownership. So if I was buying a property with someone and I was putting 75% of the value in and they were putting 25% in, then we can own at the land registry 75, 25% each. So just consider who's going to own it. And also, Nigel, we come across clients, elderly clients, just about or have retired or got some money behind them and they want to buy a Spanish property and they want that to kind of flow through the generations to their children and grandchildren. They can actually purchase the property in their children's names. So the children, so long as they're over the age of 18, could own the property. They would be the legal owners of the property, and the parents could actually be the life interest. They could be the owners of the life interest in that property. So there's various ownership options to consider. Obviously, if you do go down that route, then you've got to have a very important, I'd say, family conversation and talk about what happens if your child was to get divorced and you'd paid for that property. So make it clear, you know, an uncomfortable conversation with a potential new son or daughter-in-law about who would get what in the event of divorce, and obviously debt or a death. So a Spanish will would cover that off. So those are the things I think you've got to consider before buying a property. And then really, you know, start looking for a property. So talk to the agents we've just seen. They cover broad areas of Spain. Start talking to an agent once you've found the region and the town that you're interested in. Joanne was mentioning there the Jalón Valley. I have active clients buying there. It's a really nice area. Calpe is quite stunning. And then I live in Marbella at the moment. I've lived on the other side of the Costa del Sol. So I know Spain quite well. We travel to the islands for our holiday. So the Canaries and Balearics, also great areas. So there is something for everyone in Spain, and it's just a question, I think, of getting out there and feeling it, and then once you're comfortable, then making the move. The first step, I would say, is consider appointing independent lawyers. So typically we put powers of attorney in place for clients. We're doing that quite a lot at the moment. People are looking to come out to Spain in September, October, so we're putting powers of attorney in place. That's an important document that authorizes us to act for you in Spain to buy a Spanish property. But in the meantime, until you find a property, we can apply for your Spanish tax number, which is known as an NIE number. That doesn't mean you become a Spanish tax resident, it just means that you've got an NIE number and that you can pay tax in Spain when you buy a property. So, you know, consider appointing an independent lawyer, opening a bank account, speaking to local agents, and also opening an account with a FX company. So I think those Nigel, are the things to do to consider before buying, and what you can do before you've even found a property.
So once you've got there, one of the things that people hear about are the sort of problems with Spanish property, legal developments and things like that. Obviously, having an independent lawyer is an important factor in that, but is it much similar to completely searches that you would see in the UK to make sure that is that the main role of the lawyer?
But basically, yeah, the conveyancing process is generally similar in that there's an offer, there's an acceptance, and then searches will be carried out, due diligence carried out. Lawyers will report back to their clients, and assuming everything's happy, then the contracts will be exchanged, and then you complete. But in Spain, it's slightly different in that here we've got the position of the notary. So basically, it's a lawyer who's continued to study and has been appointed a notary, passed the notarial exams, and then they've been given a position as a notary in the local town. And basically, all official documents such as purchases of the property, sales of the property, Spanish will, company incorporation, or an inheritance have to be signed before a notary. And a notary is there to basically to protect both parties, to make sure that that basically what if you're going to buy a property, the property that you are buying is the property that the seller is selling, and they'll carry out searches. But basically, Nigel, so from the UK perspective, what we also find is that in comparison to the UK, Spanish property purchases can take a lot less time. We don't tend to have chains in Spain, so once you found a property, you can complete within as quickly as 4 weeks. On average, I'd say allow between 4 and 12 weeks to complete. And many clients contact us, Nigel, when they're actually with the agent, and they say, look, Alex, I found a property. The agent's asked us to pay some money over and look at and sign a reservation contract. If it's okay if I send it over to you, and I'd certainly encourage that. So I'd like to see that reservation contract. If you've got a mortgage, then we need to subject that reservation contract to the mortgage. If you want a survey, then that reservation contract should also be subject to survey. We typically insert in a reservation contract kind of all-encompassing clause, which would basically be for example, a statement from the seller that the property is fully legal, that the property is fully legal, it's all registered at the land registry, it has its license of first occupation, which means that the town hall inspected the property once it had been built and confirmed it had been built according to that planning permission, and they issued that planning permission. And then with that license of first occupation, sorry, not the planning permission, the town hall issued the license of first occupation, and you can then connect to the mains, water, and electric. So we would basically put in that clause, and once that clause has been put in and you've put in there, for example, typically you pay between 3,000 and 6,000 euros to take the property off the market, and then you would the exchange contracts about 3 or 4 weeks later, and then completion would be at a future date. Mortgages are taking a little bit longer to obtain, so if you are applying for a mortgage, I would allow at least up to 2 months to complete.
Right. Okay. And what are the main issues that you tend to see coming from those searches? I mean, I think you've mentioned many of them, but which do you see as the ones that cause the problems the most often, or that raise issues?
So typically, once the reservation contract is signed, we would contact the agent or the seller's lawyer, and we would ask for all the property documents. So we want to see the deed of purchase, we want to see if there's a license of first occupation, we want to see water receipts, electric receipts, and if the property is on a community of owners, we ask for minutes of the community minutes for the last 3 years, because if you're buying so another, I suppose, difference between the UK and Spain is that in Spain you only buy freehold. There's no leasehold unless you're buying a kind of commercial premises. But by and behold, if you're buying a residential property, it will be freehold. But for example, if you buy an apartment or a townhouse, that may be on a community of owners, which means you own the property freehold, and then you become a shareholder in the community of owners. And that basically means that you have to contribute monthly costs to the community, and you have a say in how the community is run. Usually the community is run by a professional administrator and a president, which tends to be appointed by one of the owners. by the owners committee. So basically, we see that get those documents in, Nigel. We apply for land searches in English and Spanish. I think it's amazing that the Spanish Land Registry issues those in English and Spanish, and then we compare we compare all the paperwork we've got. So it's very important if you're intending to rent the property that, for example, for holiday rentals, that you have a license of first occupation in place. If you're intending to rent it long term, then it's not necessary to have that license of first occupation, although it's a good document to have. And if you're, for example, buying in the Canaries, then when you purchase a property there, the property has to have what's known as a touristic license, a licencia turística. So it's very difficult to get one of those in the Canaries and also the Balearics if you don't buy a property with those licenses already in place. Typically, we carry out our searches, Nigel, and sometimes we come across, for example, a pool hasn't been registered, or someone completed an extension and that hasn't been registered. So we basically ask the seller for more information about that. We'd ask if they applied for licenses, for example, to add the pool or the extension. And if they hadn't, then we'd consider the legal situation. Generally speaking, though, if an extension has been built or added to a property and more than 6 months have elapsed and the town hall hasn't taken any action against the owners, then the seller can add that to the deeds so long as it's not on protected land. So we would ask them to go through that process before or at completion, and we withhold the costs of them to do that. So they would sign a deed declaring those buildings. The costs of registration and the taxes involved we would hold back from the purchase monies, and then we could sign the deed of completion. Those I'd say, those are the main issues. So in Andalusia, sometimes also we have what's known as a DAFO. A DAFO basically means that the property may have been extended or didn't have planning permission originally, and retrospective planning permission can be obtained, and that's basically the DAFO process. So if you're looking at buying a property in Andalusia and the countryside, then we would check to see if the property had a DAFO, and if not, we'd find out how long it would take to obtain, and we try and tie that in with the completion.
Right, and then what happens at completion? Is that again similar to the UK or better?
Well, basically, once we've prepared our legal report and reported back to the clients, we would send them a contract. We take into account the payment they've already made, and we set out various clauses in the contract. We state when completion is going to be made and when exchange of contracts is going to happen. So in effect, once everyone's happy with what they're buying and the contract is agreed, with exchange contracts, pay balance of 10%. So if you've paid a reservation contract, paid monies under reservation contract, those monies would come off. So you exchange contract, pay 10%, and then we set a date for completion. And exchange of contracts is usually the lawyer can sign on your behalf using the power of attorney, or you can sign yourself, and you would basically, we personally like to see all the money's coming through our client's account, so we can justify that when it comes to notary completion. And completion is actually at the notary. So whereas the UK completion is over the phone, here in Spain we actually have to go to the notary in person. If you've granted a power of attorney to your lawyer, then the lawyer can go on your behalf. So I've got a completion coming up on Thursday. The clients are due to come out on Friday, so we'll complete for them and then hand them the keys on Friday. But basically, at completion, we would send we'd send a copy of the contract that we've signed to the notary. We'd send them details of what has been agreed. They prepare a deed, and then we would agree the final figures between the seller's lawyer and the buyer's lawyer. The final figures are agreed. So, for example, if there's a mortgage, then obviously that has to be cancelled at completion. The costs of cancelling at the land registry and notary will retain. So any debts that are there would be taken off. And also, Nigel, if you're buying on a community of owners, then we want to see a certificate from the community confirming that there are no debts with the community. So in effect, we finalise the figures, feed those figures to the notary would set those out in a deed, we go along to completion with the powers of attorney or with the client, we'd sign the deed, pay over the balance of the purchase price, and then in exchange for that receive the keys, and that is then completion. So from that date, the buyer owns the property. We would then collect the deed from the notary, pay the notary fees, pay the transfer tax or VAT if you bought a new property, and stamp duty, and then we'd register it in the client's name. And that process takes about 2 months.
Right. Okay. Right. So, any other issues you think we need to cover, or should we now?
So can you say that again?
So I was just checking whether there was anything else you wanted to add before I moved on to the foreign exchange.
Yeah, so basically I'd also recommend that at completion that, or if someone doesn't come out to complete, that they put in place a Spanish will. I'd recommend a Spanish will for Spanish assets and have a UK will for worldwide assets, and worldwide assets and UK assets, except those located in Spain. We recommend that an English will works closely with a Spanish will. If you update your English will, the first clause of an English will is typically, I revoke all former wills, and I suggest you let your English lawyer or UK lawyer, home country lawyer know that you've got a Spanish property, know that you've got a Spanish will in place, and therefore that first clause should be, I revoke all former wills except my Spanish will dated X. So I'd say definitely have a Spanish will in place. Also consider a lasting power of attorney if you're retiring to Spain and intending to live out your last days here. Have a power of attorney in place to a trusted person, to a spouse, so that if anything happens to you, they can manage your affairs. But yeah, generally speaking, Nigel, that's basically all for me.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Alex, and I'm sure that's very useful. So we'll now move on to Tom. Tom is going to talk us through the issues around foreign exchange and managing exchange risks. So first of all, I'll pass it over to Tom. And okay. So.
Good morning, everyone. Nigel, could you allow me to share my screen? Is that?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. So
yeah,
that's fine. So if I do that and this, hopefully you can. Okay, why is that not working? Right, okay, hang on a sec. There we go. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Nigel, thanks very much for having us on. Hopefully everyone can see my screen now and see my presentation here. So a little bit about me, first of all. I'm the Director of Currency Index. We're a specialist foreign currency exchange brokerage, and we predominantly help people who are buying property overseas when it comes to moving their money from sterling into euros or dollars or whatever it might be, and allowing them to get a much better exchange rate than they would just through their bank. We also handle all the payment side of it, so the actual movement of the money as well. Ensuring that you get it all done nice and quickly and easily. And what we're going to talk about today is the actual risks that you will face when buying property over in Spain. Alternatively, this applies just as much when you're renting as well, because obviously you're still going to need to move money, even if it's smaller volumes, just to pay for rentals or deposits of that nature as well. So first of all, here are the actual risks. So the main one, and the one that you need to be very aware of, is the exchange rate volatility itself. Brexit is obviously very topical at the moment and very relevant, so we've got a section on that. Security pitfalls, sadly moving money around and doing exchanges does open you up to some risks on that side, so I'll run through some of those. And then there's the unfamiliar banking information processes and the charges you can expect to unfortunately have to deal with when you're moving money around. First up, onto the actual exchange rate volatility. It's not an area that a lot of people are very aware of. Obviously, some people who maybe worked in financial services historically might know a little bit about it, but people often don't realise that the currency markets are constantly moving. So it doesn't matter day or night, there is always movement, and they're moving second to second. It is not uncommon at all to see differences across a day of 1%, even sometimes more, and there are, when big events occur, you can see even wider swings than that. Just to put that into context, obviously £100,000 out into euros, in one day the amount of euros you receive could change by as much as £1,000 worth. The things that move the market are largely economic data releases by the global economy. So obviously the most relevant ones we're going to see with regards to buying in Spain are going to be things that are released in the UK, be it unemployment data, inflation data, GDP, things along those lines, and obviously the same in the Eurozone as well. Political news, so events that happen, you know, if there's a general election, for example, that can move the currency market significantly. And then worldwide events, you know, you can have natural disasters even can move the currency markets. So all of these things can have an impact. So you've got to be very aware when buying a property overseas that it is going to be very vulnerable to those kind of events. Obviously, the situation at the moment with regard to the pandemic is very unprecedented. It doesn't seem to have had ongoing that much impact on one currency or another. It basically seems to be impacting everyone. The US actually at the moment is probably the biggest loser, because I think they're sort of highlighted as one of the countries that's dealing with it particularly badly. And the UK is probably not doing as well as Europe. Therefore, from the currency side, the pound is weaker than the euro at the moment, therefore meaning the swing is slightly in the euro's favour. One thing that I always like to highlight to people when you're talking about buying a property overseas and the exchange rate volatility is, if you're buying a property in the UK and someone said to you, the price is going to be about £200,000, you immediately say to them, no, what's the price? I want to know the exact amount of money it's going to cost me. When you're buying a property overseas, even once you lock in the price and you've made your offer and it's been accepted, you are still essentially unaware of how much that property is going to cost you because of the exchange rate volatility. So you really do need to be very on top of having a strategy for how you're going to manage that, which we'll talk about more as I move on. So onto a graph now. This is a graph of the last 12 months worth of movement for sterling euro. So there are 3 points here. I hope you can see my cursor that I'd like you to particularly focus on. This one here, the first big sort of spike, if you like, was in December last year. Second one is this second spike, which was in January of this year. And then the third one is this big dip, which was in March of this year. Those of you who pay attention to sort of political events and are very sort of up with the news will probably be able to guess what those 3 points represent. But just to put it into a bit of context for you, the election in the UK in December 2019, when the majority government was elected, the pound increased by 2.5 cents against the euro, which, as I sort of alluded to earlier, for a €200,000 property means that it almost overnight became £3,500 cheaper as a result of that election result. The main reason for that was, and I'll talk about this in the next slide a little, but was all about uncertainty. The biggest problem the currency markets have is uncertainty, and the government getting a majority was seen as allowing them to have a more certain platform for moving forward. Again, in the second spike in January of this year was when the Brexit agreement was reached and when we began that process and left the EU at the end of January. Again, almost overnight, £5,000 cheaper for a €200,000 property. However, on the flip side, during March, when the outbreak occurred and when lockdown happened, the pound was one of the really big losers. The UK economy obviously is going to be very dramatically affected, and we're also almost seeing some of that already. But the UK government was not seen as acting as decisively and quickly as the European governments, and therefore there was a 9.5 cent decrease over the course of not very many days, which for that same €200,000 property means it was going to cost almost £14,500 more, which is a huge, huge amount of difference just on the exchange rate, obviously. Moving on, we obviously have to handle Brexit itself. There are, sorry, I thought there was one more slide, but no, there are certain currency realities which, irrespective of your view of Brexit, whether it's a positive or a negative, the reality is that the currency outcomes are pretty well known and understood at this time. And there are positives and negatives. If we reach a deal by the end of this year, which is obviously a possibility, then it is likely, extremely likely in fact, almost certain that the pound will significantly strengthen. The main reason, point 2 on here, that the pound is so weak is purely uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen, we don't know when it's going to happen, and we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. And the currency markets hate that. Currency markets essentially move because massive investors and hedge funds move billions of units of currency around. And the simple reality is they will not put those units of currency into sterling and therefore boost the UK investment side if they don't know what's going to happen in that currency zone. So if we see that deal, whether it's a good deal or not a great deal, you will definitely see, almost certainly, almost certainly, not quite the same, but it will almost certainly be a positive outcome for the pound, which is obviously good. If you're buying property overseas, you'll see a strengthening of the exchange rate. The negative outcomes are just as certain. If there is no deal, as we have seen every time no deal has come onto the table, the pound will weaken. It is not an exaggeration to suggest that parity with sterling euro, so 1-to-1, or even below, is a possibility. The last time we were very, very close to a no deal scenario, the pound was down as low as 105, 106 against the euro. We're not much higher than that at the moment, but we are a little higher, but that is a real possibility. The bank, a lot of the major banks' treasury guesstimates and forecasts suggest that that sub parity is a very real possibility. So you really should have that in mind in terms of your timing. Alex alluded earlier that from a residency perspective, it's best to try and get things done ahead of that. You could argue the same from a currency perspective, because I still think percentage-wise, the no deal outcome at the end of this year is probably more likely. As I've already explained, uncertainty really is the killer of the currency markets. Every time during this long process since the 2016 referendum that the pound has been particularly weak, it is because we don't know what's happening. There haven't been deals. There have been losses of, when Theresa May called her election and then lost the majority. The uncertainty that brought was what killed the pound at the time. Couple of more logistical sides of things. A lot of people are worried that when it comes to, if we don't have a deal, what will happen? Will we still be able to move money around so easily? The answer is yes. All of the UK financial institutions, ourselves included, have got strategies in place that allow us to move money in and around Europe just as easily. So you don't need to worry about that at all. The SEPA system, which is a single European payment area, it has already been confirmed that the UK will remain within SEPA even after we officially leave the EU. So there is no concerns on that side, please don't worry. One thing you will have to be aware of, it is already an issue, is that banks in Spain can charge fees for receiving funds. They can charge all sorts of other fees as well, but this is a specific concern. So what we do when we're transferring money to Spain is we bring any transfer below the SEPA threshold, which is €50,000. Some banks, it's actually even lower. but we will split down a payment. So if you're sending 300,000 euros over, for example, we will actually send for you 6 tranches of 50,000 to ensure that you don't get hit with those receiving charges. But you do need to be aware that there are lots of charges with Spanish banks, but none of them are going to be affected or impacted, particularly by leaving the EU. Security pitfalls. This is a very real concern in all industries, in all sections of society, but specifically this part of the world, this part of the process is very vulnerable to this. First of all, and one of the main things to cover off is the actual provider you use for doing your FX and international transfers. Obviously, UK banks on the security side, you're pretty certain are going to be 100%. They're all regulated, they're all very carefully monitored by the FCA and the Ombudsman Service, and subsequently, you're pretty much safe and secure on that side. However, as I've already suggested, and as we'll come to a bit more in a few minutes, their exchange rates are very, very poor. So you really, in my view, I mean, obviously I have a vested interest in suggesting this, but you really should be looking at an FX broker such as Currency Index. When you do these kind of transfers, you will get a much better rate of exchange and a much better service that's targeted to help you with your strategy. There are within the world unregulated FX providers. The UK FX industry is fully regulated. So in order to do what we do, you have to be regulated by the FCA, which means that we are regularly audited, and they come along and make sure we're doing everything correctly. We have to run safeguarded client accounts in the same way a lawyer would, for example. So you're protected. You're just as secure really as using a bank, and there's no real risk to that. However, there is unregulated providers out there. So a lot of them have offshore banking and things along those lines, and some of them are what are called white label organizations. So if you, for example, use one of the bigger currency companies as your provider, but you are just a sales organization selling currency to people, you are essentially piggybacking on that other provider's regulatory position, and that can mean that as an end user yourselves, you are not protected in the same way that you would be using the actual regulated entity itself. There are quite a few UK-based companies who operate in this format. It's very easy to tell because they will be very small, and on their website it will say something along the lines of our regulatory position is covered by our relationship with partner firm XYZ. If you use that firm, the reality is you are not protected in the same way you would be going directly to the company with regulation. So you really do need to be careful of that. And offshore FX providers, there are companies who provide this service based in Canada. There are companies who provide this service based in other countries around the world. You are simply not protected in the same way you are if you using a company regulated in the UK. So I would always recommend using a UK company. The next 2 points are really one point combined. In the world that we live in, everyone obviously is very aware that online systems, emails can always be hacked. And you really need to be very, very conscious of this and double check everything that you do, especially when you're talking about things as important as banking information. We have seen instances where French lawyers' emails have been hacked, and an email has been sent from that French lawyer to the client saying, please pay the funds here, and they unwittingly forward that on to us, and we are therefore instructed by the client to send the funds to a place that could in theory lose them all of their money because it's a fraudulent account. We have very, very strict compliance processes in place, so we have never encountered an instance like that where we've fallen foul of it. We've encountered plenty of them where the client themselves has fallen foul, but we've always picked them up. So you can rest assured you're going to get a lot of compliance support from a currency broker such as ourselves. but you must do your own checking on everything. The easiest solution to anything is anything you receive paperwork-wise, ring the number of the company that you know from their website or from paperwork you've had from them when you were making inquiries, and double check everything, triple check things. Make sure that you are 100% certain that if you're instructing someone like ourselves to send a lot of money there, that they know absolutely that the bank details are correct. You cannot be too careful on this side. And online invoice fraud is related to the same thing. If you receive an invoice from someone, it will probably look 100% genuine. You must make sure that you again do a verbal confirmation, because invoices can very, very easily be fraudulently altered. Onto unfamiliar banking information, process and charges. Obviously, within the UK, we're all very aware of account number and sort code being the standard things that you need. And these days also the banks are very hot on the actual account name matching what they're holding as well. It used to be that the account name wasn't actually even checked. It was always about the account number and the sort code. But now those three things are the critical things for UK transfers, and we all know that. We're all very used to that. When you're sending money over to Spain, the three pieces of information you definitely need are actually very similar. The first one is the IBAN, which stands for International Bank Account Number. The second one is your SWIFT or BIC code. And the third one is, again, the actual name on the account. The name of the bank, the address of the bank, all these things are often asked for, often mentioned, but actually they're irrelevant. It doesn't matter at all. All of them are designated by those other things. So the IBAN itself is made up of about 4 or 5 different sections of numbers. It actually includes, for a UK IBAN, for example, it includes the sort code and the account number of the account, but it also includes things that designate which branch, which bank, and all that sort of thing. So those are the three things you really need to be aware of. The SWIFT code is essentially an international sort code. SWIFT network is what is used to move money around, and it provides a code to every bank when the bank is set up or when it joins the SWIFT network, and that SWIFT code basically with the IBAN provides the route the funds are going to take to get to the destination bank account. IBAN numbers can be very long. 27 for France, 24 for Spain, 25 for Portugal. So you really do need to be very hot on double checking them, triple checking them, as I said earlier, to make sure that you get those numbers correct. If you don't, if an error is made, it will almost certainly be picked up by the remitter. So when we put an IBAN into our banking system, if it's not right, the banking system will tell us, and we'll be able to tell you to double check. So there is always extra layers of double checking, but please do make sure to do those double checks yourselves. Receiving and remitting charges, as I already alluded to, when you send money over to Spain, the receiving banks can charge quite significantly for receiving funds. And when they're returning funds, when they're sending euros out, they will also have quite significant remitting charges and commissions as well. So you do need to be very careful when you're doing that, and aware of the SEPA network. You should be saying to banks, no, you can't do that because of SEPA. And if you can do it because it's too much, then please send it in lower amounts. Moving on to the next point, as I've already said, when we send SEPA payments, we break them down into smaller amounts. And likewise, you should do the same if you're sending SEPA payments in euros over 50,000 for whatever reason. In Spain, Alex will probably know more about this than I do, but bankers' drafts are still a thing, and they often come up as a point of contention because people obviously would much rather use just bank transfers. But they are still quite commonplace, and they do incur significant charges to A, make, and B, to receive. So again, something to be aware of. And finally, bank versus broker. People use banks because they trust them. You might bank with a bank for 50, 60 years, a very long time, and you build up a good relationship. That's obviously very understandable, but you really do need to be aware of the pitfalls when it comes to this part of your process. The exchange rates can be appalling. not far off cash rates, 3 or 4%. Again, €200,000 property, you're talking a £6,000 or £7,000 difference. Slower transfers, they inevitably take longer. The person behind the counter in a bank does not know what's going on in the currency markets. They can't help you. They can do the transaction, but they can't tell you when you should do it. And a lack of options. They can move the money for you, but they can't give you all of the different ways of doing it. On the broker, on the flip side to each of those points, often you won't have ever heard of the broker, but as long as they're regulated, that doesn't matter. You will still get looked after in the service that you want and the safety that you need. As I've said, the regulation side, same day, next day transfers, so much quicker. Obviously, the exchange rate's significantly better. The expert currency knowledge, all of the traders at Currency Index have worked doing this for years and years and years. They know what's going on in the market. Picking the right day to do a transaction can be just as important as who you use to do it. And multiple currency purchasing options. We have different contracts types for different to suit different circumstances. Forward contracts are the big thing for mitigating your risk in a volatile market. You can buy your currency today, even if you don't need it for, as Alex said a few minutes ago, 4 to 12 weeks for a purchase. Do you want to wait 12 weeks to know what the rate is for your property purchase? You can lock in that rate now using a forward contract and not have to have all of your sterling to hand if you're waiting for it to come from a property sale or a pension release or something along those lines. So do discuss that, because that is going to help to protect you from the market. And finally, a bit about us. I want to give you information, not just sell Currency Index to you, but we're very good at what we do. We're multiple award-winning service across all of the years that we've been in existence, more than a decade now. We offer exceptional exchange rates, and we're regulated by the FCA and HMRC in the fullest possible way that we can be. So yes, thank you very much for listening, and if there is any time for questions now, I'm happy to answer them. Alternatively, obviously, later on in the Q&A.
Right. Okay. Many thanks, then, Tom. I think we'll cover any questions in the Q&A, and so thanks for that. And we'll now move on to the financial side. So I'd like now to introduce Brett Hanson of Blevins Franks. Welcome, Brett. Perhaps we could start by asking if you could give a little background about yourself and Blevins Franks.
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. So Blevins Franks provide financial planning advice to British expatriates who are thinking about moving to Europe. We have local offices in all the countries that we work in, and we provide regulated advice and qualified advice in each of the countries that we work in. Now, those countries are Spain, France, Portugal, Cyprus, Malta, and the UK. I've been based in the Javier office of Blevins Franks for 18 years, fully qualified here. I have a daughter here starting school. My girlfriend is here, and my parents are here.
Right. So people moving to Spain will want to understand the tax system in Spain and how it differs from the UK. Could you just give us an overview of the tax system in Spain?
Certainly. So if you become a resident of Spain, or more specifically a tax resident of Spain, then you are liable to tax on your worldwide assets in Spain. There are a few exceptions, but what that means is that any income that you've got from bank deposits or investments is liable to what's called savings income tax rates, and that starts at 19% and goes up to 23%. Pension income, rental income, that's liable to what's called occupational income tax, and that starts at 19%, but can go up to 48%. You then have capital gains tax, like you do in the UK. So if you sell an asset for, say, €200,000, and you bought that previously for, say, €100,000, then that €100,000 difference in value would be liable to capital gains tax. and that starts at 19% and goes up to 23%. You have something which isn't kind of usual for UK or British people to experience, and that's wealth tax in Spain. So this is where Spain looks at your overall assets and values those assets, and then you're taxed on those assets each year, as at the 31st of December. There are quite significant allowances, but you need to be aware of this tax because this isn't a tax on the interest or the growth, this is a tax on the value. And then finally, you have something called Spanish succession tax or Spanish inheritance tax, which is kind of along the lines of UK inheritance tax, though you need to bear in mind that there is a liability between husband and wife, whereas in the UK, that isn't the case. A lot of our work is ensuring that people that move to here, those taxes are minimal and that they're structured so that they can pass their assets to who they want without these tax liabilities, that they can enjoy tax-efficient income. And if they sell an asset, there are structures whereby it doesn't give rise to these taxes.
Okay, thank you. So how do you actually become tax resident in Spain? Is that similar to the UK or different here?
Yeah, so there's three kind of criteria. And if you meet any one of these three criteria, then you would be regarded as a tax resident of Spain. The first thing to bear in mind is that the tax year in Spain runs from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. And if you spend more than 183 days in that year in Spain, then you would be regarded as a tax resident of Spain. Secondly, it may be that you don't spend those number of days in Spain, but if you work in Spain or the majority of your assets are in Spain, then you would be regarded as a resident of Spain. And the third criteria is if, for example, your husband or wife is living in Spain as a resident, or you have children in school here, then they would assume automatically that you are a resident of Spain.
Right, thank you. And so what are the consequences of becoming a tax resident?
Sorry, could you repeat that again?
Yeah, what are the consequences of becoming a tax resident?
Yeah, so if you become a tax resident of Spain, then, like I said earlier, then what happens is that you're liable to tax on your worldwide assets in Spain, and you wouldn't be, for example, liable to tax on your assets in the UK, though, like I said earlier, there are a few exceptions. Right.
And one of our attendees asks, is it possible to be tax resident in two countries? So can you be resident in Spain and the UK at the same time?
Yeah, so you can be resident in two countries, and it is possible to be tax resident in two countries as well, but only where there isn't a double taxation treaty in place. The UK and Spain does have a double taxation treaty, and that doesn't mean that you get the choice. Quite often I come across people who've been living in Spain for many years, and they say, oh, well, I pay my tax in the UK because of the double taxation treaty. The double taxation treaty doesn't give you a choice. There's a tiebreaker clause, which then looks and says, right, okay, well, look, you're resident in both countries, but now we're going to look to see where you're tax resident. And typically, you're only tax resident, therefore, in one of the countries and pay tax in only one of the countries. So, to answer your question, if then you are resident in both the UK and Spain, you will only pay the tax in one of those countries, but you've got to go through the tiebreaker clause to decide where that tax is paid.
Okay, thank you. So when people are planning their move to Spain, are there any issues from a financial and tax perspective that they should think about before they make the move, or can they wait, given that they've got to be here for 183 days before they become tax residents?
Yeah, it's a very good question. My advice is that as soon as you're thinking of moving to Spain, you should speak to someone like ourselves that can provide advice for both the UK and Spain, and just make sure that you're speaking to someone that understands the Spanish tax system. I do come across people who have moved to Spain. They've planned things before moving to Spain using their UK advisor, but the UK advisor hasn't understood the tax situation in Spain, and therefore have structured things and put their assets in structures which actually result in them paying a lot more tax than they would otherwise have needed to pay. The other thing to bear in mind is that the tax system is very different in Spain compared to the UK. So, for example, if you sell your main property, your main residence in the UK as a UK resident, there's no capital gains tax. But if you sell that as a Spanish resident, then the full gain, since you've owned that property, can be liable to capital gains tax in Spain. Ayres, which are tax-free in the UK, are liable to tax in Spain. And if you want to take your pension cash lump sum, you can take out 25% tax-free in the UK. It's liable to tax in Spain. So I would say, look, speak to someone like ourselves as soon as you know that or as soon as you're considering moving to Spain, to find out what needs to be done before you move to Spain, and then what needs to be done once you're in Spain.
Okay, thank you. We now have a number of questions from people who've sent them in before the webinar. So the first of those is somebody saying they inherited some money from their mother, and my wife and I are using this to buy a villa near Javier. My wife does not want to sell our UK home until we're fully settled in Spain and we're happy living here. I know the UK government has played around with tax relief on the main home over the years, but I've not kept track. What do I need to be aware of?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we get asked this question quite a lot. And in fact, when my parents moved to Spain, my mother wanted to keep their family home because she felt it was a big move. She wasn't sure whether she was going to enjoy living in Spain, and wanted to keep it like a bolt home. But I think after about 2 or 3 years, they did decide to sell. There's a lot to this. I mean, the first thing is that it's the UK which says, look, if you've got a property which you've lived in all your life, then you do not need to pay capital gains tax on that because it's treated as your main residence. Now, what the UK do, they look at what's called qualifying years and non-qualifying years. Now, for most people, all the years are qualifying. They've bought the property, they've lived in that property, the family home for a number of years, and then they sell it and say buy another property in the UK. But if you do not live in that property for a period of time, let's say you rent that property out, that would constitute as unqualified years. So that when you go to sell that property, they look at the proportion of qualified years to unqualified years. So if you don't that, if there was a 100,000 gain and you got that property for 10 years, but for 5 of those years the property has been rented out, then 50% of that property would give rise to capital gains tax. So at the moment, the person that's just asked the question, if they were to sell that property now, probably no capital gains tax. But if they move to Spain and they keep that property for 4 or 5 years, then there is part of that proportion of the gain could be liable to capital gains tax in the UK. In the past, they never looked at the last 3 years, but that's now reduced to 9 months. So that's one thing. But they've also got to bear in mind that once they're living in Spain, then you're liable to tax on your worldwide assets in Spain. And so if they sell that property as a Spanish resident, the whole gain potentially is liable to capital gains tax in Spain. There are some exceptions. So if you're over 65 years of age and that's been treated as your main property for the last 3 years and you sell that property, there's no capital gains tax. And if you're under 65, it's possible to minimize that tax. So they need to think carefully about this. I mean, if it's a case that they've been coming to Spain for many years, they think they're going to stay here 99%, it may be a case of looking to sell that property now before they become residents of Spain. Or possibly what I've suggested to other people at times is if there's a big gain, they could sell the property, buy another property in the UK, and then they're starting the capital gain from zero again.
Okay, thank you. Well, the next question we've had is, my wife and I have been gradually squirreling away savings in their ISAs since their introduction in 1999, and they built up a substantial pot of investments. This is their retirement nest egg and what they plan to live on when they move to Spain next year. Does the tax treatment change when I leave the UK, or are they still tax efficient?
Okay, so the thing to bear in mind here is that ISAs are tax-free for UK residents, but once you become a resident of Spain, they will be liable to tax in Spain. So any dividends that they make, any income that they pay, if you sell some of those ISAs and they give rise to a capital gain, that will be liable to tax in Spain. When it comes to ISAs in the UK, you can't add to them once you are no longer a UK resident, but you can keep them. But because of the tax implications on that in Spain, typically what we would advise is that you would sell those as a UK resident and therefore have no tax to pay, and then put them in a structure which is tax efficient for Spain. Now, that doesn't mean that the money has to be brought into Spain, but it will be in a structure which Spain recognizes, which allows for tax-free growth and minimal amount of tax on withdrawal.
Right. Okay. Right. We now have somebody asking about wealth tax. So they've been researching on the internet, and they wondered if you could explain how it works, how much it is, and is it possible to minimise what you have to pay?
Yeah. So wealth tax I spoke about briefly a few minutes ago, but in effect, what the Spanish do is that they look at your worldwide wealth and they tax it each year. The tax rate starts at around 0.25 and can be as much as 3% plus, but you would have to have wealth of more than 10 million for that kind of tax liability. Now, you do have personal allowances. You have around 300,000 euros each on a main residence. So if you're a married couple, you've got 600,000 euros on your main property in Spain before you consider paying wealth tax. But you get a further allowance. Now, the state rules give you a further 700,000 euros each, but in this region, it's actually 600,000 each. So a married couple typically have around about allowances of 1.8 million before they pay wealth tax.
Right.
I should just add, actually, that there are structures, though, that can minimize this tax. So, if you are in a position where potentially you're going to have a wealth tax liability and you are seriously looking to move to Spain, I mean, obviously speak to us, because it could be that we can then negate that wealth tax liability.
Okay, excellent, thank you. The next one says they've sold their UK home and they're about to rent a villa in Spain with a view to buying nearby. They have a number of different pension schemes, private company and government, and they assume that the simplest, the most efficient thing to do is to transfer them all into one SIP. Is that correct, or how would you advise?
Yeah, I wish it was that simple. The thing is with pension schemes is that different pension schemes have different rules. Those rules are changing all the time. George Osborne, some years back, altered the way that the way you could access pensions. So it's quite a complex area. In fact, we have pension specialists here, which typically looks at all your pensions, do quite a bit of analysis on what the options to those pensions. They look at your attitude to risk, your objectives, your tax, kind of where you're going to be taxed, and come up with recommendations. That could be a SIP, but the fact of the matter is that in the pensions that's just been described, you wouldn't be able to transfer all those. So, for example, a government pension, I'm assuming it's, for example, a teacher's pension or a local authority pension, you can't transfer that. That stays where it is, and actually would be liable still to tax in the UK. So that's one of the exceptions I said earlier when I said that once a resident of Spain, you're liable to tax on your worldwide assets in Spain. There's a few exceptions. That's one. So if you've got an RAF pension or prison service pension, that will remain taxable in the UK, and you wouldn't be able to transfer that pension fund. State pension, you can't transfer that into another pension, but that would be liable to tax in Spain. The other thing that I think that you've got to bear in mind here is currency. You know, your UK pensions, if UK based, are always going to pay you an income in sterling, and yet you're going to be living in Spain, where you're spending euros. We've seen over the last few years the exchange rate drop from around 143 in November 2015 to about 110 at the moment. And that's a huge drop. That's a 30% drop in spending power. So what you might want to consider with the pensions that you can transfer, but only after obtaining pension advice, is potentially an international SIP as opposed to a SIP, because a SIP will always pay you your income in sterling, whereas an international SIP, it's possible to look at euros as well, or a QROP, a qualifying recognised overseas pension scheme. I'm not advising that they do that, but that's an option. But what they really need to do is get qualified pension advice.
Okay, thanks, Brett. The next question we have here is, I have over the last 18 months moved all of my UK pensions into a single SIP, and I intend to draw down for the fund in my retirement. I plan to move to Spain in 2021 when my UK state pension starts, but my pensions will be in sterling and my expenditure will be in euros. Is there anything I can do to eliminate the currency risk?
Yes, I mean, that's basically what I've just been talking about. You know, your SIP is always going to be in sterling, but you're going to be spending euros. There is an international SIP that you could look at in relation to investing having the underlying assets in euros, or a QROPS. The alternative, obviously, is to use a currency company, currency index, for example, to where when the money is being transferred over, it's being paid in euros.
Right. Okay, and the next person is Expat. I'm from the UK, but I'm living and working in Oman and have been for 7 years. My aim is to retire to Spain in 3 years. I have several rental properties in the UK and a couple of pension schemes. I've also built up capital in a retirement fund provided by my employer in Oman, which I can cash when I retire. What do I need to be thinking about?
Yeah, okay, there's a few things to this. I mean, I'm not specialised or qualified to provide advice to people living in Oman. I don't know what the tax situation is there, but I would imagine that the tax is very little. What I do understand, though, is that as you've been out of the UK for 5 years, there's no tax liabilities for you in the UK. When you become a resident of Spain, it sounds like there's quite a sizable amount of wealth there, which will generate wealth tax and also potentially income tax on the rental income. The other thing is that the UK have kind of played around with the tax benefits on rental income. So it may be that what you should be looking to do is selling some of those UK properties whilst living in Oman and putting your money in a structure which would be much more tax efficient for Spain. But I certainly would be, if I was yourself, thinking about the advice or seeking advice now before you become resident in Spain, because I think there is opportunities for you to make changes now with very little tax, which you wouldn't be able to do once resident in Spain.
Right, okay, thanks. Next question. My wife and I are in the course of buying a villa in Alicante and selling our UK home. As a result, we will be left with spare capital, which along with our pensions, we will live off. Will Spain tax me on the capital when I bring it into the country, and how should I invest it in Spain?
So they won't tax you on capital. So there's no tax on simply transferring money from one country to another. But certainly I would suggest that you potentially look at a Spanish tax compliant bond for investment. Now, what that means is that the money can roll up tax-free, like an ISA. Only on withdrawal do you pay tax, but on the minimal amount. As to how you invest within that structure depends on your attitude to risk, because you've got a variety of different assets that can be held within there. But that would also minimize wealth tax and Spanish inheritance tax. Or certainly will also give you the option of being able to leave the assets to who you want without any complications or hassle.
All right. Okay. Okay, but the next person here has been advised by their golf partner. So I am planning on buying property near Calpe and moving to Spain in the next couple of years. A long-term friend who I play golf with has told me to make sure I arrange all my finances tax efficiently, but more importantly, make sure I declare everything correctly. Otherwise, the penalties and interest can be quite nasty. Is this true?
It is. Spain, in the past, if we were talking 20, 25 years ago, people would actually say, oh, well, don't worry about declaring that, and don't worry about declaring this, and put your money in an offshore account, and things like that. But, with technology changes, and also with the financial crisis, governments throughout the world have wanted more taxes and are communicating more with each other. If you think about the kind of people that are the famous people that's been living in Spain, most of them seem to have had tax investigations in the last few years, whether it's Mourinho, Guardiola, Shakira, Messi, Ronaldo. The Spanish tax system, I would say, is now one of the toughest in Europe. And what they also did in 2013 was introduce something called the Modelo 720, the Overseas Asset Declaration, whereby you have to put down your assets or your worldwide assets on a form for them then to be able to see. That doesn't incur a tax, but if you don't fill in that form correctly, the fines and penalties of not doing it or not filling it in correctly are very high. And actually, through the computer systems and everything that we have now, they're informed of most of those assets anyway. So, my advice is, yes, definitely put everything down, do everything correctly, employ a gestoria, which is like a local accountant, to complete your tax returns in Spain. Obviously, that your tax implications may not be particularly high, and certainly if you structure things correctly, that can be the case. You can live here and pay very little tax, but what tax you should pay, and declare everything correctly.
Okay, thank you. The final one of these questions is, I have recently spoken with my UK financial advisor about my proposed move to Spain, and he said that I can retain my ISAs whilst I live there, and that the spare capital which will arise on my UK house sale should be invested into an Isle of Man offshore life assurance policy. Is this all correct, and is this the best advice?
I'm sure your UK advisor has been doing a fantastic job for you whilst you are a UK resident. But what you've got to bear in mind is that they are unlikely to be, one, qualified to provide advice in Spain, and two, are unlikely to understand the tax system in Spain. In the same way that if you said to me that you were moving to Zimbabwe, I wouldn't be able to give you tax and investment advice for your residency in Zimbabwe. So what I do recommend is that you do speak to someone who is based in Spain, who's qualified to provide you with advice in Spain. The reason I say that is, like, I come across people who have stuck with their UK advisors and have made what I would say are bad decisions. Your ISAs are tax-free as UK residents, but once you become residents of Spain, they will be liable to tax in Spain. And if you put your money in a bond in the Isle of Man, then I can tell you now that it will not be tax efficient for Spain. So like I say, your advisor's probably been doing a great job for you in the UK, but you've got to change your structure now, change your mentality, in that you're now going to be liable to tax in Spain, and you need to understand or deal with someone who understands the rules in Spain, not in the UK.
Okay, many thanks, Sid. Well, that's all on the financial aspects, and many thanks for your input, Brett. Right, I was just wondering, if, before you go, I know it's not your direct expertise, but your experience should enable us to get a reasonable insight. If you could just ask you a couple of questions about the Spanish healthcare system. So the first one is, as a Brit during transition, do you have access to the state healthcare system, and is it free like the UK NHS? Does it depend whether you're working or retired?
Yes, so currently, if you become a resident of Spain before the end of this year, then under the withdrawal agreement, you have lifetime long access to the health service in Spain. However, that is the case if you are at retirement age and receiving a state pension. And in that situation, you would get an S1 form, and you'll be covered under the Spanish healthcare. If you are below retirement age, and you're working in Spain, then you would get coverage, or you can get coverage there because you're paying Social Security into the system. Now, for people that are moving to Spain before the end of this year, and are not yet at state retirement age, then they have two options. One is private medical insurance, and they can take that out and continue with that until they get to retirement age. The other option is to pay into the Spanish system, even though you're not working, which is a system called the Convenio Especial, which is around 60 euros per person when you're under 65, and around about 160 euros when you're over 65.
Right. Okay, and now if someone doesn't move to Spain until 2021, after the end of the transition period, will they be able to access the state healthcare system in future years?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. Are you stating that what's the situation after the withdrawal agreement?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, well, after the withdrawal agreement, we're not sure what's going to happen. What we can do is look at the situation for non-EU countries now. And what happens in that situation, it depends on whether there's a bilateral agreement. Now, between some non-EU countries and Spain, there is a bilateral agreement, which means that you can have access to healthcare for, say, emergencies, but you should take out private medical insurance as well if you're going on a holiday or a short-term trip. In the situation where there is not a bilateral agreement, then you should certainly take out private medical insurance. I think the thing to bear in mind here is that post-Brexit, I mean, I understand that there are many Brits that still plan on moving to Europe, to Spain, post-Brexit, and I'm sure that Spain as a whole wants those Brits to live here. So I would hope and think that there'll be some sort of agreement and coverage in the future, but really they're not focused on that at the moment. What they're focused on at the current time is getting a trade agreement, and I think what we'll have to do is see in early 2021 what the situation is then.
Okay, many thanks then, Brett, and thank you for joining us, and I'll speak again. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Okay, now I'd like to introduce Carrie-Anne Harrison of Ayres Insurance, and she will be talking to you about the private healthcare available in Spain and the various terms connected with that.
Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Carrie-Anne Harrison. I'm the health specialist for Ayres Insurance. Just quickly, a little bit about IBEX. IBEX Insurance Services Limited is an international broker that's been established for over 20 years, since 2000. We work with several different insurers across the general insurance market, so we can offer things from car insurance, home insurance, house insurance, for example. We have 9 offices across Spain, 2 in Portugal, and our head office is in Gibraltar. We are governed by the Gibraltar Insurance Association and also by the Financial Services Commission in Gibraltar, where we're fully authorised. I deal with all the health insurance for Spain, and that's what I'd like to touch on for you today, just to go through. If you're thinking of moving to Spain at the moment, in order to obtain residency, as my previous panelists have advised, you need to have private medical insurance or access to healthcare in Spain. So if you have access through self-employment or through a job that you have or through the S1, that's fine. However, if you don't, then you will be expected to have private medical insurance. Now, there are many different products on the market with different insurers and different levels. So it is very important to make sure when looking that you look at the level that is right for the residency requirements in your area. So at the moment, in order to obtain residency here in Spain, you're looking to have a product that covers you for inpatient cover, outpatient, hospitalization and surgery, and it must have no co-payments or excesses, or in Spain, copagos. So it's very important that it has no excess on the policy. So like I say, there are many policies out there, many that have excesses, which tend to be slightly cheaper premiums, but may not be the right fit for residency. So it's important to know that. Also, when you apply for your residency, your insurer should provide you in Spanish with a certificate of guarantee, which will need to detail the covers of the policy you have and also clearly state that this policy has no excesses or co-payments. So that's the level that we're looking for if you're looking to become a resident of Spain. So now that we know what you're looking for, I'd just like to talk a bit about the 2 main types of product that are on offer here in Spain. So the first would be a direct billing product, and the second a reimbursement. So I'll just run through this for you. So the most popular product in Spain, sold by most of the Spanish domestic providers, is a direct billing product. This is where you will pay a premium for your policy, and the insurer will give you access to an approved list of doctors, hospitals, clinics, specialists, for example. Now, your policy will cover you for treatment and for using any of the services, providing they are on that approved list that they have. And how it works is you would go to an approved medical centre in your area, and you would show them proof of your colour or your membership card. You would receive treatment, and then the medical centre would then bill the insurer direct. So you don't have to pay for anything, get invoices, and if you have no co-payments or excess, there shouldn't be anything to pay. This is the most popular product because of its convenience, it's easy. Most of the insurers have a very large network list that cover most areas, and it's convenient for most. Although the insurers do offer the cover to the expat market and sell it as English speaking where appropriate, it is important just to realise that most of the general medicine doctors on these lists are English speaking or can speak English. But once you then get referred to certain specialist areas such as cardiology or dermatology, the more specialist the medical area, sometimes the less the English is spoken. So you may have to take a translator. They can't guarantee English speaking at all times. Another thing to consider is the medical list in your area. So it may be that the insurer that you're looking at has an approved doctor just down the road, but it may be that the nearest one is in the next town or a 20 to 30 minute drive away. So before purchasing anything, you need to really look at what's accessible for you to use on these lists in your area. And also, some insurers only have medical network lists in certain provinces or in certain areas. So if you live in the northwest of Spain, for example, they may have some medical lists in that area, but they don't cover all of Spain. Whereas some other insurance companies offer medical facilities across the whole of Spain, including the Canary and Balearic Islands. So if you travel throughout Spain a lot, or you go on holiday in the islands, then it might be worthwhile taking a product with an insurer that has medical facilities in this area. If you take it with an insurer that only has it in certain provinces, you'd have to wait till you got back to those provinces to have treatment. Whereas if you're, let's say, on holiday for a weekend in Barcelona, and your insurer has no medical list in Barcelona, you'd have to wait till you got home for treatment. Whereas if they do have an extensive list across Spain, you could just simply go to the nearest hospital or medical centre in Barcelona. So these are all things to consider when looking at this product. But as I say, this tends to be the most competitively priced product, because the insurers will have already pre-approved prices with these doctors, hospitals and clinics on their list, so they know roughly what costs are. So this is the first type of product. The second type is called a reimbursement policy. This tends to be offered more by the international providers, but also by some domestic providers too. However, they tend to cover a larger area rather than just Spain, more European coverage or worldwide, for example. These policies tend to be slightly more expensive because you have the choice to choose your own hospital, clinic or doctor within your area. So if you have a European policy, you could choose to see a dermatologist in France, for example. And obviously the insurer doesn't know what the costs are likely to be, so they tend to rate the premiums on this type of product a bit more. These products are very good for people who require full English speaking services, because you yourself can choose the doctor or clinic to make sure they speak English. However, on a reimbursement policy, how it works is as an outpatient or a day patient where you're not admitted into hospital, you would be expected to pay for the treatment yourself and obtain an invoice and medical report, which you would then submit to the insurer and look for reimbursement back. If you were to be hospitalized or have an operation that costs a significant amount of money that you couldn't be expected to pay first, then the insurer would send a letter of guarantee to the hospital confirming how much coverage you have, or in this case, they may set up direct billing on this occasion. So these policies tend to be, as I say, more expensive, but guarantee more English speaking. So again, it's something to think about. Whereas the domestic products on the medical network list, they do offer quite a lot of English services, but they cannot always guarantee. Okay. Another question I'm asked is, if somebody takes a European policy, once the UK leave the EU, will their policy still be valid? The answer is, even after the UK leave the EU, geographically, the UK is in Europe, so your policy will be unaffected and you still can use that product. And again, for people who don't spend the full year in Spain and who want to do 6 months maybe in the UK, 6 months in Spain, this product is good to cover you in both areas. And again, you would need to take a policy with no excess, which is available. So there are the two main types of policy that are on the market that we can look at for you. But I just wanted to run through some types of underwriting that are on offer. I won't go into it too much detail because it's quite a lot, and you can always come to me for, after the webinar for any questions on this. But what you need to consider as well is, if you have any pre-existing medical conditions, before you move to Spain, it's very important to look at what options of underwriting are available to you. So the main, most popular underwriting, which is used by most of the Spanish providers on these direct billing products, is called fully medical underwriting. So this is where you would fill in an application with the insurer and you would declare all of your pre-existing medical conditions for your medical history. You don't need, or you don't usually need a medical itself, but the onus is on you to declare your pre-existing conditions. Now, a pre-existing condition is anything that you have been diagnosed with and received treatment for, even if it's diabetic treatment, a certain diet or physiotherapy, as well as medication or an operation. So once you've filled in all of your pre-existing conditions, the insurer will then look at certain factors such as your height, your weight, your age, and they will then determine what terms they can offer you on the product. Most of the time, the insurer may impose an exclusion on the product, so to not cover a pre-existing condition, and in some cases, they may not be able to offer cover at all. Most of the Spanish domestic providers will exclude pre-existing medical conditions, and this is usually done either through a general exclusion in the policy wording of the product, or they may write an even more specific exclusion as part of the policy contract itself. So it's very important to look at the policy terms and conditions of the product to check if you have pre-existing conditions. Again, for people who are just looking to come over and gain residency and they are not as worried whether or not they have this condition covered, this is still a product that they can take, but it is still important to consider. The next type of underwriting is called moratorium underwriting, which usually has a 2-year period. And what this means is any pre-existing condition is usually excluded for the first 2 years. If during those 2 years you are symptom-free, checkup-free, and medication-free, then the insurer may consider fully covering that condition after the moratorium period. This tends to be offered by more international companies, but it's particularly good for people who may have had conditions in the past, such as cancer, where they've been given the all clear and they are now medication-free, checkup-free, and symptom-free, but they're concerned that in the future, a form of cancer may return, either the same one or a different one, and they would like to have this covered in the event that this happens in the future. And the last type of underwriting is if you currently have private medical insurance in the UK, before you actually cancel a policy, it's very important to consider what options you have. So if you have current insurance that you are receiving treatment for a pre-existing condition, depending on certain criteria and the insurer, some of the international insurers may consider what's called a switch or a CPME underwriting, which is continuing personal medical exclusions. So basically, they will consider transferring over the cover that you have with your insurer in the UK over to your new policy, but this is dependent on certain criteria. However, if there's a break in cover of even just 1 day, then this option is not available. So a lot of people think, I'll cancel my health cover in the UK and then I'll get to Spain and start looking at health insurance. By doing that, you are limiting your options because you need to really look before you get to Spain. Obviously, this type of underwriting is a lot more costly because if they do consider transferring the cover over, they're going to be taking on more risk. So the premium will be subjective to that. But again, it's just something to consider if you have certain pre-existing conditions that you do want covered. So not to bore you with all the underwriting terms, but basically, when you're looking at coming over and becoming a resident, there is usually a product available that we can offer you. Obviously, this all depends on you as an individual because everybody has a different medical history. Everybody has different requirements they want to meet. I have a lot of people say to me, my friend down the pub only pays X amount for their insurance, which is fine, but obviously they may have different medical conditions to you. So what we try to do is, like Joanne Alderton said earlier, we try and get to know you, get to know what you're looking for, what your budget is or what you're looking to spend, why you need the cover, and also, although you're looking for the cover to get residency, you'll be purchasing this cover anyway, so you want to make the most of it and make sure that you've got the right cover. We want to look at if it includes preventative checks, such as well man or well woman checks, where you can have your prostate checked, your mammogram, smear tests. So we want to make sure you're getting the most out of the product you're taking anyway. And as I say, all the insurers offer different covers, different levels. So there's quite a lot of important information to consider, which is why we suggest you come to a broker such as Ayres Insurance, and that we can make this quite easy for you. We can go through everything. Obviously, a lot of the documents for residency have to be provided in Spanish to take to your appointment, but where possible, we will provide equivalents in English to help you understand what you're purchasing and how to use your policy. We'll help you look at the medical networks in your area to see where the nearest English-speaking doctors are, and we'll basically just talk you through the whole process as best we can. That's pretty much it on the medical, because I can't really excuse me, give you general prices because it's so specific to your age, the province you're in, the level that you want. A lot of people put on expat forums on Facebook, we can offer from this price. I wouldn't want to give you a price that is not going to be anywhere near what you're looking for, because it might not be the right product for you. But obviously, please contact us if you would like a quote or to go through the underwriting in more detail to match up what you're looking for. We have, like I say, 9 offices in Spain. You can visit in person. You can contact us on our website, www.ibexinsured.com. Nigel will have all of my contact information. And like I say, we can help you through the private medical insurance section for your residency to get you the best cover for your medical history. And that's pretty much it, really, Nigel, unless you'd like me to cover anything else.
Carrie, I've just got one question from somebody here. They're basically saying that they're retiring to Spain, they are moving towards 70, and is age a major factor in being able to obtain private healthcare at a reasonable cost?
Age is a factor, of course. They look at your height, your age, your weight, etc. It depends on the insurer. We work with a panel of over 14 insurers, both Spanish and domestic. And we have companies that have different age brackets. So some will have a maximum contractual age of 65. We have some with 75. And we also have some insurers with no age bracket. But obviously, it depends. The cover tends to be the higher the age bracket, sometimes obviously the premium is linked to that, and also the cover. But we do have products with no age bracket, but again, it depends what you're looking for and what you're looking to pay.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll now sort of move on to some general questions we've had from the audience. And the first one, I think, is probably for you, Alex. Let me just make sure that everybody we can hear. So just 1 second. We've just got to get everybody on. Right. So the question really is: they're in the UK, have a property, and they have their NIE numbers. The question is, can the Spanish solicitor, who has a power of attorney, process the majority of their residency application, leaving them just to attend the local police station at some point near at the end of the year when they're out? So
the answer to that is, so I understand the question being, can a lawyer in Spain progress the residency with the power of attorney? And the answer to that is yes. However, the applications now can be submitted online, but the applicants have to be in Spain at the time. So we're undertaking that work for clients, and they may have to come. They will definitely have to come back to Spain to pick up their card. We'll receive an appointment for that once the residency application has been successful. And if they're not registered on the Padron, which is the local census, that's something they would have to do beforehand. But yes, most of the documentation can be managed by the lawyer in Spain.
Right. Okay. Thank you. The question here, I think it's probably for the property people, which is people ask. This was specifically about the Javier region, but I think that this may well apply generally. And that is, what is it like out of the season? Is it good living here outside the season because people have a holiday over here, but does it all close down out of season. So perhaps, Nigel, you could cover that for your area.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. I can't speak for Javier. Actually, Javier's pretty good actually out of season as well. Oh, you're back. I can't see you.
Hello. I don't know why you can't see me.
Go ahead. Would you like to take that one? Sorry, if you weren't there. I couldn't see you.
Yeah, I don't know if my camera's working now. I'm having technical issues today, boys. So, yeah, Javier it's basically an all year round place to live. It's stunning. Everything stays open. It obviously anywhere along the coast goes slightly quieter through the winter period when you're outside of the main sort of 10 to 12 weeks of the summer season. But as a place to live and base yourselves for your retirement or for your overseas expat life, you can't really go wrong with a place like Javier. It literally has everything that you need. Same along most of the major towns down the coast.
Okay. So, Nigel, would that be true of the areas that you're in?
Yeah, it is. The closer to the coast you are, and the more established the area, obviously there's a lot of residential people living there. I guess if you lived in a golf resort, 25 minutes inland, it's going to be quieter, probably out of season. However, a lot of people are renting on those resorts to include a local Spanish too. So basically, there are certain areas, and again, people are worried about that. We can show them where that's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in that instance, the towns are always more vibrant. They're obviously more populated year round with local residents. So, they're not reliant on the tourists to remain lively and justify having commercial units open all year round. So, any areas near to town, proximity to villages are normally equally as busy. So those that aren't so reliant on holidaymakers. So from my perspective, Benalmádena, Arroyo de la Miel, the Cala de Mijas, Marbella, Benavís, Estepona, they're all pretty much the hotspots as far as thriving activity all year round. The beaches are the place to be in the summer, and the old town, central town, obviously more so in the winter time.
Right. Question here about mortgages. Are buy-to-let mortgages the same if you're to buy a property to let out rather than Alex, you got something?
Yeah, we don't tend to have a specific buy-to-let mortgage here in Spain. It would be more of someone would have to prove that they've got the income to pay the mortgage, and then it'd be up to them to rent it out. That we don't have, as I said, a specifically designed buy-to-let mortgage like you do have in the UK. So it would mainly be purely residential, and typically you can borrow up to 65 or 70% of the loan to value.
Right, but so would the rental income from that property be taken account of in terms of when assessing their ability to pay that?
Well, I think what the applicant would have to prove to the bank is that, first of all, they've got sufficient income to pay the mortgage in their own right without having to rent it out. And then if they rented it out, then obviously that's a bonus. Because of COVID, we've had a lot of people who rented their properties out have had holidays cancelled, and they haven't been able to take advantage of the monies that they're expecting. So I think banks will be even more cautious moving forward, Nigel, and they'll want to see that the applicants can pay the mortgage on their own 2 feet without relying on that rental money.
Right. Okay. So another one on residence here. What is the latest date you can arrive in Spain to establish your residence? So the person says, could we literally arrive on the 31st of December and with the intention then of staying here after that, or do you have to have established your residence a period before the?
Yeah, so basically the procedure in place at the moment is that if you want to become a resident, you've got to prove that you've arrived in Spain before the 31st of December. I think, you know, if you arrive on the 31st of December and you haven't thought about residency before, then whether or not you get residency will be a bit risky. So I would suggest that people, if they're thinking about moving to Spain now and applying for residency, they open a bank account, they apply for their NIEs, they buy a property or they rent a property, and they prepare all their paperwork so that can be submitted by the 31st of December. But I wouldn't start the process on the 31st of December.
Right. Okay. I think we've covered this, Tom, but somebody here says, do you think the current exchange rate between the euro and the pound is likely to be around for a while?
I think these kind of levels, if you actually look back at the last few months, these kind of levels have been fairly static while we move through this pandemic period. There's not any clear direction on exactly what's happening with the Brexit talks. It's the usual to and fro. We've been past a couple of supposed deadlines of, oh, we have to have a deal agreed by here without anything happening. So I think that's just going to be ongoing and rumbling for the rest of the year. And the pandemic seems to be simply a case of whichever zone wins the race to come out of lockdown more fully so their economy can get going better. So the problem that we've got everywhere now is that we're seeing more lockdowns coming, and obviously the quarantine issue with the UK and Spain is not helping anyone at the moment, but I think it'll rumble on probably for some time to come, these kind of levels. Although having said that, obviously these kind of levels is kind of anything from 109 to 112 probably, and within that there's obviously better days and worse days. So but yes, I don't think you're about to suddenly see a jump to 120 or anything like that. And the only thing that will cause a really big move is going to be something decisive on Brexit.
Right, okay, thanks. One here says, I'm an American and Irish citizen, plan to move to Europe. I would like to understand how I need to register in Spain with the tax authority to get health insurance. I believe me, a little bit more complicated than the situation with someone from the UK. So, I mean, given they've got Irish citizenship, does that make it a relatively straightforward thing, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, the kind of rush on at the moment is for British people who are here already or are looking to rent or buy this year, is for them to obtain residency before the end of the transition period. Because this year, once they've obtained residency, they've got residency for the next 5 years when it will be renewed. If an Irish person, and next year we expect, or we still don't know, but we expect that British people will be able to spend 90 days in a 180-day period. And they may have to apply for a visa to come into Spain. That won't be the case for Irish nationals. So Irish nationals will be able to come into Spain freely. They won't have to apply for a visa, and they will be able to apply for residency under the kind of the current rules that we've got in place at the moment.
And there's an additional one here, which seems to be quite similar. It's a US citizen, but they have European, UK residents themselves, citizenship themselves, but their wife is American. And the question is, is it easy to then take their wife and bring them over?
So in that situation, when we've got a European who's applying for residency and a non-European, what we tend to do is we obtain the residency first for the European, and then we add the non-European afterwards as a beneficiary.
All right, okay. So, good question here. What tax brackets are there for people who would like to rent out a property in Spain?
Yeah. Okay. So you get a tax allowance of 5,550 euros as a resident in Spain, and then you start paying tax, starts at around 19% above that. If you do a long let, then up to 60% of the rental income is actually tax-free. So it's possible that only 40% of the income is taxable, based on, and then with those allowances that I talked about. The tax rates change from region to region, so you just need to bear that in mind as well.
Right. Okay. So those are all the questions I had. So as we'll draw that to a close. Thank you everybody for participating, and hopefully the audience have found that useful. I would say before we leave that it is, if you have any questions, feel free to send them through and we can pass them on to any of the speakers. If you want to contact any of them, please let me know. I'll be in touch over the next few days and weeks with you to sort of follow up and check whether you have any additional questions, whether you want to contact people, and also there will be a recording of this available if you want to sort of look back at one particular part of the webinar or indeed watch the whole thing again. But many thanks for everybody's attention and all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Nigel.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks.
Good.